What is going on, everybody? We are back. It is Thursday, so that means me and 49ers Plus Pod are back in your face, in your living room, on your phone. I got to think of an intro or a name or something because it's hard for me to just go into it. So we're back talking a little Niners news. Niners shutting some guys down going forward. There's not a ton of excitement to talk about other than the 49ers got 2 more games to play, and then we have no football for 6 months. So trying to take in what we can over these last couple weeks and talk a little football while we still can. So that's what we're here to do. So how are you doing?
Doing good, man.
Al?
Hopefully you had a good holiday, you and the family, everything relaxing, food, gifts, whatever it may be. But good to be back talking Niner stuff, even though it feels, I don't say like an afterthought, given the whole lack of playoff stuff. But at least there was news and notes this past couple days that are worth talking about. It wasn't a boring week by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I don't even know where I could start. I guess we could start with the fact that both Trent Williams and Dre Greenlaw are being shut down for the last 2 games, which to me and to you and to pretty much any Niner fan with a brain, that was like a foregone conclusion. I mean, why play him? Why
Yeah.
risk him? I never thought we were going to see Trent Williams anyways. And as far as Dre Greenlaw, I thought the best course of action, even when you heard the press conference last week with Fred Warner saying we got to protect him from himself and things like that. Kyle saying that he thinks that he should shut him down, but he needed Dre's approval, which I think is great. I mean, I'm great that they have that kind of discourse between each
Mhm.
other, but it's for the better. There's nothing to play for, so why risk it?
Yeah, I mean Trent Williams going back a couple games, right, when they showed not Trent, excuse me, not Trent Williams on the telecast on the
Gotcha.
sideline in the hoodie. When they showed Williams up in the booth, he had the scooter next to him. I mean, he
Yep.
wasn't close.
Yep.
He was never close to coming back. And of course, with 3 games left at the time, and now when we're left with 2, it it doesn't make sense to obviously put him out there. I mean, the Niners are scraping and they're signing players off the streets, off practice squads onto their practice squad to have enough bodies. I mean, who knows what this O-line is going to look like? And Kyle was asked point blank, do you worry about starting Brock? Are you thinking about shutting Brock down because of what the O-line looks like? And, he answered the way that I think a lot of fans don't like coaches to answer about, we're going out there to win games. Like, they're not worried about draft position. They're not worried about protecting players. I mean, protecting players in this instance, like Brock behind an O-line. Brock's healthy. They're going to bring O-line people in. It's an next man up mentality. So he's going to have to play. But someone like a Dre, someone like a Williams, if Bosa's oblique, takes a turn this game on Monday night, I'm sure they would sit him for the regular season finale. But the same thing with the Raiders. Like Antonio Pierce was wildly defiant about winning that Jaguar game and then getting bumped out of the top, I think top 6 or top 7. He's like, we don't worry about anything other than winning a game. And I guess he feels either really confident about that or really confident that he's coming back next season because he just took himself out of the running for a quarterback. And that is a team that absolutely needs one. So end of the season, I know it all sounds good about tanking, this, that, and the other thing. The only sport that tanking has obviously occurred in is the NBA, which is still wild to me because their lottery process involves ping pong balls in a lottery machine. So you could tank all you want. It guarantees you nothing, but it's not happening in the NFL. That's not Kyle's mentality. And that's not players' mentality, especially players that are like maybe a little bit older, fringe roster players. They're playing for jobs in the future. Like no one's thinking like that except for us dorky fans.
Yeah, Fred Warner. He has his podcast that he does from his car. I don't know. That's a really weird one. I know he has one where he does with his wife, and then
His wife,
there's this
yeah.
show that he does from his car. I'd never understand it. But he's talking about the same thing about, finishing the year out strong and playing and all that stuff. And he's another guy. I mean, if you really wanted to be, you know, a negative Nancy and be like, well, he shouldn't be on the field either because he's played with a fractured foot or a fractured ankle all year. He's going to give it a go. So I mean, they barely have enough players to suit up. So it's not like
Yeah.
a lot of players could sit out anyways.
Well, they
Um,
activated, you see, they activated Tatum Bethune off of IR to return for the last
uh,
2 games.
did see
That's,
that.
that's not a Fred Warner thing because he's injured, but that they need bodies. I
Any
mean, they
bodies
may
at
need
line?
another body at linebacker. It's funny thinking about a team, but again, that's the mentality. Like they could have left. I mean, Bethune was a 7th round draft pick. He's not a cornerstone of the franchise defensively at all, and he may never be. But when you need bodies, you bring back whoever you need to. Be damned.
Yeah, Greenlaw to me was something that I even thought even during the Rams game where we had a chance to keep our playoff hopes alive barely, if we won out and all that stuff. I thought Greenlaw bringing him back early was a mistake from the get-go. And I mean, he couldn't make it through 2 games, both
Yeah.
games not early. Whether it was injuries opposite or completely different from the Achilles. I just think it was smart to just have him come back next year fully healthy, even if he's not a 49er, which there is a possibility that is a chance, and that sucks for 49er fans. He's trying to get paid. He's trying to get the bag. You wonder if um, his issues with his injuries, his medicals, all that stuff are going to affect him when he gets paid in April, March, whenever. And can the 49ers somehow bring back not only him, but Hufanga with similar deals of guy's been hurt for a bit, their liabilities possibly, so we can get some sort of team safe deal. And then they play a bunch of games or hit a bunch of accelerators in their contract, then they get paid. So I guess that's the only positive you could take out of that if you want to be that kind of guy who's doesn't really care about the player and just cares about trying to get them signed and be like, well, he needs to take a team first deal. But this,
Yeah.
I honestly think with just both of them coming off the seasons that they did, and especially Hufanga. Hufanga's been hurt most of the last 2 years. So I could see the Niners bringing him back on a deal. But again, it's all going to be based on what the market is. If other teams are willing to pay players that have been hurt a lot over the last couple of years going into free agency, then I wouldn't. If I'm the Niners, I don't overpay for either. Unfortunately, if I had to keep one guy, and I know you'll probably agree, it would probably be Greenlaw or everybody else. Just based on how when he's healthy and when he's effective with Fred Warner, it's a completely different defense.
Mhm.
Night and day, 100% night and day. When he came out of that game at halftime against the Rams, the whole game changed.
Yeah.
One play. We always talk about how Fred Warner's like this dude, right? He's the guy, right? He's one of the best of all time. If Fred Warner's Batman, Dre Greenlaw's Robin. But this Robin is a badass version of Robin. It's not like the guy that you saw in the tights that did acrobats. This is a whole different version. This is like a Zack Snyder version Robin, who's just as much of a badass as Batman. So
he's more Nightwing.
He's
Nightwing
definitely more Nightwing
than Robin. I mean, the free agent stuff. I think Hufanga. I'm curious how this is gonna play out. The Niners will have money for one of them in addition to Brock. I don't know if they're gonna have money for both. And all it takes is one team to offer them the bag, and generally it's going to be a bad team. Like teams like I think the Patriots, the Raiders, they're up there in cap space next year, and generally bad teams need high talent, high profile players, like these. And usually the only way that great or very good players go to very bad teams is by getting a whole lot of money. So I think the Niners are going to get outbid unless they make a concerted effort to put a more than fair deal on the table before free agency starts beginning of March. And I think it's still one, not both. But I mean, the bright side being, if they miss out on one or if they miss out on either, at least they know that going into free agency, and then coming out of free agency, you still know what your holes are for the draft. If they decide to take a linebacker in the third, fifth round, or a safety relatively early to kind of help plug a hole. So and that's no different than any other team, right? They're going to know the Niners are going to have enough money, like I said, for one of them, because they still have a lot of other holes to fill on this roster. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things. How comfortable do you feel with the safety pairing of Mustafa and a question mark versus Warner and a question mark? I mean, if you can only slot one in, and that also
tough.
It's tough. I mean, it's really tough. And who knows who's going to be released between now and March at each position for the Niners to look at, or you can't really project out to the draft because you have no idea how that's going to shake out. So it really is a gamble. I'm sure the Niners will make, I don't want to say modest, but modest to slightly generous offers to both of them. And I'm sure both or one will say, you know what, thank you. Let me get back to you. Let's see how free agency goes. And that's fair.
Sports says that we need a new defensive coordinator. I would agree with that, especially with how things have played out this year. I also think the Niners are in need of a special teams coordinator as well. So those are two things. Yeah, I told you, man. The only way for that to happen is to finish as bad as we possibly can. So we need to have mass calamity happen in every game where things are it's just a no brainer. I feel like anytime the Niners or any team finishes the season strong and they have question marks about a coach or a player, whether they should bring them back, and then they have a bunch of success in a bunch of meaningless games. We all fell for it with Jimmy G. We thought Jimmy G was the second coming of Joe Montana Christ. We thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and he beat up on a bunch of bad teams at the end of the season. Team wasn't going anywhere, and then it ended up being we signed him for a bunch of money, and it never worked out. So, yeah, I would love to see the defense get a new special teams coordinator going into next year. I don't know. We talked about this on the Monday show, but it seems like if you listen to someone like Bosa, who seems to have a lot of pull on this team, the defense, when the defense coordinators come in here that are new, they have like a little bit of grace period. It takes them a while to figure out the defense, which doesn't really give me a lot of confidence that there could be a switch if Bosa's, politicking for this guy to stick around. I don't know if you feel the same way.
I mean, Bosa is one of the captains, right? And the highest paid defensive player in the league. He's soft spoken, and I'm not sure how much weight his voice is actually going to carry. But yeah, I mean, that was the case with, Saleh in 2017. Granted, that team had no talent in 2017 and 18. Then when Miko came in, and now for Sorensen, Kyle hasn't spoken out against Sorensen, and fans were getting on Kyle for him giving Jake Moody a vote of confidence when asked about him today or yesterday. But what is a coach supposed to say? I mean, are fans actually expecting a coach to say, yeah, we're probably going to be looking at a kicker in the offseason? I mean, I'm sure he could have worded it something like, well, Jake knows he has to make those kicks, and he knows that the team's counting on him, and he did come out and say it could be the injury. He's been a different kicker since the injury. All that stuff. I am going to wonder, when it's all said and done, yards allowed is one thing, and the Niners are good at that. Points allowed is another thing, and the Niners are not good at that, especially in the fourth quarter. Getting stops, getting sacks, getting turnovers, they're kind of mediocre. Third down conversions, stops are mediocre as well. They can do better. Can they do worse? I guess so, right? Statistically, I guess they can do worse. But I would say if it takes a while for a D coordinator to understand either the personnel or the system, then start calling shit in the preseason. Don't treat it as like a vanilla nothing. Those are 3 games where you can start calling stuff and figuring out, even though you're trying to figure out what players are going to be on your roster, start figuring out the scheme then. Have more joint practices. Call stuff more in training camp. You don't have to get until, week 12 for things to start clicking. That seems wildly unacceptable, and it's because they've been rookie coordinators the past 2. Someone who's more seasoned is not going to take that long. And for as much as people were crucifying Steve Wilks, the defense did not start off slow last year. They did not start off slow last year, and they were the best fourth quarter scoring defense in the league. So you can bring on an old hand or someone with more experience that I think could jumpstart the offense from September on and not wait until November to be like, oh, see, now we're getting it. Like, that's horseshit.
I still think that they're vanilla even now. In the last game that we played, they looked vanilla. It looked like the same old. Rush forward, drop 8. I don't think Sorensen has shown anything this season that he has any ability to manipulate or mix up coverages, show you multiple fronts, zone blitz, stunts, anything, just something different. And there's nothing. I see nothing. Strobeck made a good point. He's like, the Chiefs had injuries without Chris Jones. They were still able to get pressure. Nick Sorensen ain't it. I just think that if you lack something in the player department or the talent department, you have to make up for it schematically. And there's things that you can do schematically to hide certain deficiencies on your defense, or at least to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen that Sorensen is able to do that. He's had more than enough guys healthy this year at different points. And so it's not like injuries are the biggest are the biggest excuse because there's been points in the season where we had some guys and we had enough talent on defense, and he
Mhm.
still wasn't able to get the job done, giving up a bunch of fourth quarter leads almost every week. Um, and so I'm not of the mindset that if he comes back next year, if you give him another run at it, he's going to figure things out. I think that's one of the issues I have with this particular team and this set of, how they are with the comfort of like thinking that it's something that we can fix and we can wait till
Yeah.
next year and instead of, addressing it because well, we did it last year, so that means we can do it this year. I mean, I think that's been the Niners kind of MO over the last couple of years. And I think they thought into this year things were going to change and get better, just like they did in previous years with other guys. And that's kind of a dangerous way to be. I think you got to make change happen, or you got to make
Yeah.
things happen. You shouldn't automatically think, well, because it's happened previously, that it's going to happen this year. So,
No,
uh,
there
I,
should be no run it back mentality, right? I mean, you're running it back basically with the core and the veterans and obviously the rookies that played really well this year, but not everybody's coming back. They're going to have 15 new players this offseason. So you're talking about what?
yeah, I'm trying to
30%,
think.
12 to 15% of the roster, or 20% of the roster is going to be new. So it's going to be a whole new look, but I think as far as Sorensen goes, can he grow? Of course. To say that he wouldn't be better in his second or third year versus the first, I think that would be unfair to him, right? And has it gotten better the past month than the first 2 months? It has, but he hasn't shown anything differently schematically. I think that's where the defense and the offense, to some extent, they need to develop new wrinkles. And if we want to talk out of both sides of our mouth, saying, well, they're missing players and the wrinkles that Kyle has already created or showed, this NFC championship game or Super Bowl for the past 5 years. I get it. But then the cynical side is, well, they haven't gotten over the hump, right? Like the wide nine, the cover three, Kyle's, the way he's, dialing up offense last year was great. But it did sputter out at times in the Super Bowl. What are those slight adjustments that they can make to get over the hump? And it feels like, at least for now, I mean, all three phases are to blame. All three. And I don't even know in terms of like, if it was a pie, how would you break that up? Like, I don't think it's 33, 33, 33 between the three groups. I'd have to think about how
It'd be
I
a lot
want to
of
break it
skinny
up.
pieces, when they try to make a large
Yeah.
pizza look better. So they
Yeah.
just take a half a large piece and cut it in the middle, and now it's two skinny pieces. There's a lot of skinny pieces of blame all around the pie.
There is.
It's not just one massive chunk in one spot. So
But yeah, I'm not convinced that Nick Sorensen's defense will ever look like Steve Spagnuolo's defense, right? Because Spagnuolo just has what, 20 years on him. So to bring someone, even someone that's got, say, 5 years of, like someone that's gone through the trial and error phase of their DC career and has come out the other end maybe better for it or learned stuff, I think would just be an improvement. And especially if it's an aggressive improvement or a more of a downhill defense, I'll get behind it. Regardless of what the defense looks like next year, I don't think anyone's going to be pining for Sorensen if he's indeed gone.
right. One of the things that Kyle mentioned in his press conference is he thinks that Brock Purdy this year, for the struggles that he's dealt with, could have a bounce back year, and that the things that have happened this year could serve him into the future going forward. We were talking offline about how Brock Purdy took a massive step back this year. I mean, I wouldn't say massive, but he's definitely struggled and not looked as good as he was.
Mhm.
And you could blame the roster, you could blame the offensive line, you could blame him. Teams getting a beat on him, whatever you want. We talked about how the fact that C.J. Stroud, who was being anointed to be this great draft pick of a quarterback, has had a similar down year, and how it's kind of it's not a fair argument. You got one guy who was the last pick in the draft, and you got a guy that was a top 10 pick. And yet the guy who's the top 10 pick is actually getting more grace and more
Mhm.
leeway than a guy who already, if his career ended right now, accomplished way more than he ever
Yep.
should have based on where he was drafted. And I think a lot of fans need to think about that. Like, based on where Brock was drafted, whatever has happened is already more than ever should have happened because he
Right.
was the last pick in the draft. Stroud was a top 10 pick. Why is there a discrepancy in how I mean, same thing we talked about Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, amazing, talented guy, right? They don't win. They don't win. He's an MVP catalyst candidate every single year, but what has he done in the playoffs? He has as many Super Bowl victories as Brock Purdy, and yet why doesn't he get the same criticism? What? Because he dresses nice and he looks the part? Like, I think Brock Purdy has the biggest chance as anybody to come back next year and be a better player.
No, I totally agree. And yeah, we were talking before the show. It's Dak Prescott was my fantasy QB for the past couple of years. I didn't have him this season. But I equated him to James Harden. When Harden was in his prime, he'd be great for your fantasy team. He'd get you a lot of points, a lot of baskets, a lot of yards, whatever, but it's meaningless. There'd be meaningless points, right? He put up 40 against a garbage team on a garbage night, but then when games mattered or it's the playoffs, they would both completely choke. The CJ Stroud and Brock Purdy stuff, it still is amazing. Now, obviously, we are not on Texans Twitter. I have no idea if anyone's calling for CJ Stroud's head. I did see some sort of rumbling about people were calling for D'Amico Ryans to be fired or like something ridiculous. And that's when, obviously fan is short for fanatic, but it still is amazing to me. There, in terms of the national discourse, though, there is no one like a Nick Wright taking shots at CJ Stroud. Nick Wright is taking shots at Brock Purdy. And maybe it's because Purdy has one extra year and he's about to get paid and CJ Stroud's not, but it certainly is a draft position bias for sure. And I think what you were saying, Aaron, I think people look at it like if Brock's career ended, he should be happy because he accomplished more than anyone thought he should. And they equate that to his ceiling, that he's already topped out. It's 2 years in, he's topped out. He should just be happy to be here. Anything you got from him, Kyle, John, Niner fans, is gravy. It's, Cinderella, the clock's going to strike midnight. He's going to turn back into a pumpkin. And first round picks, you are justifying that investment. First round quarter. Look at how many lives does Sam Darnold have? I'm sure if Zach Wilson gets cut by the Broncos, someone else is going to pick him up because they think I can harness the talent. Only Trey Lance, in a weird way, as much as the Niners moved heaven and earth to get him, they cut bait extremely quickly because they saw that Brock was the better option. And let's not gloss over the fact that when Trey was demoted to QB3, he pouted like a little bitch and went home from practice that day and then came back and requested a trade. So that was, and people, conspiracy theorists can say, oh, that's what they told you. Maybe the Niners just wanted to trade him. We don't know. But that's what was reported. Trey never refuted it. And he went on, to Dallas. It's still just amazing how more people aren't rallying around Brock because he's the ultimate Rudy underdog story. And long story long, can he have a bounce back year? Of course. So many things went wrong with the team. Defense, special teams. You can't pin everything on Brock, just like you can't pin everything on Kyle as much people want to because he's the head coach. But the quarterback for the offense does deserve the lion's share of the blame, right? Because he touches the ball every play, handoff, pass, fumble, or otherwise. Maybe last year was his ceiling. And maybe that was the best we will ever see a Niners offense go. And if that's the case, that's pretty damn good because you had two offensive players in the top 5 MVP voting. But to say that Brock can't be a high 20s, low teens, high 20 touchdowns, low teens interceptions quarterback year over year is preposterous. And oh, by the way, those quarterbacks still get paid and he is still going to get paid low to mid 50s. If that's his career average, say 27 touchdowns, 12 interceptions a year, that's going to get paid, and that's top 8 to 13 in the league.
Yeah, I just feel like if we're going to be super critical and we're going to break guys down and, overanalyze everything they do, then they should do it for the guys that have been in the top 10 and or were drafted in the top 10 that are expected to be, these elite quarterbacks that everybody wants. Everybody wants an elite quarterback, but yet there's only a handful of them. And in order for you to get an elite quarterback, most of the time you got to suck really, really bad. And there's still not a guarantee that when you draft that guy, he's going to be that elite quarterback. I mean, look at the Bears, look at the Jets, the Broncos first time around. Now they got the new guy there that looks pretty good. I forget his name.
Bo Nix. Yeah. I mean,
Bo
even
Nix.
Going back with the CJ Stroud thing, I forget someone on social media, a noteworthy person said that, CJ Stroud is the more dynamic quarterback than Brock Purdy.
Of course.
How are we defining the word dynamic? Just because CJ Stroud is taller and has a stronger arm? There's nothing dynamic really about CJ Stroud's game. He's a pocket passer. Brock can move. Brock's the more dynamic and the dynamic athlete, right? Like in terms of picking up stuff on the ground, pocket awareness, running backwards, even though he does kind of some crazy things. Mobility in the pocket. There has been games where Stroud has looked lost. Not many of them. 2 straight games against the Ravens, though, he hasn't put up a touchdown on offense. I think that's problematic as they kind of head into the playoffs, only because they're in a division that is absolutely terrible. So even words like, when we're talking about elite traits, dynamic traits, one, I think they're misnomers and people confuse what they actually mean. But people also have to understand that for a quarterback that has elite traits like Jamarcus Russell did and Ryan Leaf did and Jeff George did and a host of others, does not make them potentially an elite quarterback, right? It's still a mathematical equation. People just get enamored with certain measurables and they can't get off it, right? And they can't get off it. But I think next year is going to look a lot different than this year, but a lot of it is based on health for this team, because look at the Lions, man. I mean, they're
What do they always say? Health is wealth.
well,
Health
yeah.
is wealth.
And Detroit's defense has basically exploded health-wise. Their offense has been okay until 2 weeks ago. David Montgomery got shut down for the season. So that's going to be an interesting Niners O against the Lions D and the Lions O against the Niners D. I mean, Ben Johnson's going to run circles around Nick Sorensen on Monday night. It's going to be ugly. If you haven't taken the Lions, given 3.5, faithful, just go do that.
If you want to see the game that will get Nick Sorensen fired, hopefully, it's this coming Monday. In a weird sort of way, I'm hoping that our defense just gets absolutely boat raced.
Yeah.
Because then there's no question in Kyle's mind. And I don't care what Nick Bosa says. I don't care what the Cabo Click says when it comes to the defense. If you have one of those games where they just struggle mightily and they can't stop anything, and he's running circles around him, like you said, running around Sorensen's defense, and great. If that's what it takes, let's get him out of here.
Make it look bad.
What did you think of the tweet that we both saw today about bringing the Trey Lance argument back into life that's been dead, saying that the Niners, should have let him develop like the Bills let Josh Allen developed, and we would be at the same place in his maturation process. The fact that we're still talking about this and that the guy has been a third stringer since he left the 49ers. I mean, what do you make of that, man?
Yeah, I mean, that it was brought up by an absolute nobody, but it was just who the tweet was directed to was just brown nosing to get into the ivory tower of some content creators. Listen, it's kind of like flat earthers. You can't argue with them because they're gonna question, like, where's the proof that the earth is round? And Trey Lance is the great enigma of what if. You can't argue with someone that's going to say, well, you don't know. Like, they'll point to what Brock has done or hasn't done, or Josh Allen or everybody, but you have nothing to point to at Trey. So they're going to actually, when they point their finger, it's going to point to the most optimal outcome because nothing has happened and they can make it as blue sky as they want. Being a Star Wars fan, I know you are as well. I didn't hate the sequel trilogy. I think it could have been better, but you have a contingent of Star Wars fans out there that are saying, well, if George Lucas wrote and directed the sequel trilogy, it would have been so much better. Oh, really? The prequels were a hot mess, writing, direction, pandering to kids. But since we know what the sequel trilogy is and we don't know what George Lucas would have done, people are automatically assuming that option B would have been better. And with Trey Lance, that's severely not the case. We were talking about it before, we went live. He really should have went to a shit team, right? He should have went the Anthony Richardson route. Like, that's the comp to me. Someone who was very raw. Granted, he played at D1 Florida versus D2 North Dakota State, who needs time, needs reps. And the fact that we were both happy that they took Lance. I didn't want Mac Jones. I didn't want Justin Fields. You knew Lawrence was going to go where he was going to go. So I was happy with the pick, but it became apparent very early on that he was not ready. And to draft and potentially play a super green quarterback with a win now roster was illogical at best. And you still had fans who ridiculously thought in 2021 that he was going to start over Jimmy. You had a large contingent of fans that thought Trey Lance was going to, in his rookie year, was going to start over Jimmy.
And they also, and remember when we lost that NFC Championship game to the Rams, a lot of people were saying, well, if we would have known this would be the outcome, why didn't they just start Trey? We would have gotten to the same place. I don't necessarily believe that.
That's impossible to say. Yeah, it's so, the Trey Lance thing. Listen,
good question.
What was that? What was the thing that popped up?
Why would anybody talk about Lance at this point?
I know.
It was on Twitter today, man.
It's a shame. It's a shame that we are, and he's still not getting, at least to the best of my knowledge. If anybody out there that's watching, please correct us. He's not starting over Cooper Rush the last 2 games, right? Like, even when the Cowboys are out of playoff contention and Jerry Jones or Mike McCarthy still does not want to see what they have in Trey Lance because he is not a better option than Rush.
Trey Lance fans are like Zack Snyder fans now that James Gunn has taken over Superman, right? All the talk, and I was a Zack Snyder guy too for a while, up until this last 6 months or so. I was of the contingent that he needed to bring back the Snyderverse and rewrite the wrongs of the studio, and it's over. It's done. He's gone. We have a new man in James Gunn. James Gunn is essentially Brock Purdy. He's in charge of the 49ers offense, just like James Gunn is in charge of the DC universe. Let it go. It's over with. It's never going to change. You could talk about woulda, coulda, shoulda all day, but at the end of the day, it's over.
Well, when you brought up Zack Snyder, it just always made me think. As much I love 300, I really enjoyed Watchmen.
I love Man of Steel
paperback. All good stuff. His Rebel Moon movies on Netflix are garbage, or mediocre garbage, whatever. But I'm still fascinated how his original movie Sucker Punch. Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm.
How do you take a premise that involves 5 attractive 20-year-olds in skimpy outfits with artillery and samurai swords and make it boring and unwatchable as a cold-blooded American male? Like, how do you waste Vanessa Hudgens barely wearing anything and still I'm watching the movie going, when is this going to be over?
Yeah. You're looking at your watch like, geez, it's only been on for 20 minutes. Exactly. That's where we're going. Lance can't even read defense. He still can't. When he got in with Dallas this year, he looked abysmal. So, yeah. Let's. I want to jump off the Trey Lance thing. There's this video out here that I wanted to have you watch. It's Emmanuel Acho. He's a blowhard.
Oh, yeah.
He's a wannabe preacher and everything. He says that ego was the downfall of the 49ers. And I want you to watch this video, and then I'll ask a question. If you think ego was part of the downfall. Now, just if you have a hair trigger temper, I suggest that you get one of those balls that you can squish or something, because this guy, he tends to irritate you just by listening to him. So I'll have you listen to it.
The ego. The Niners' egos is what's to blame for them. Part of it too. Playoffs. Kyle Shanahan's ego, which said, I know more about defense than defensive coordinators. So, Steve Wilks, although you have the number 3 defense in football, I'm going to fire you and promote a defensive quality control individual. Ego is what led Deebo Samuel to believing that a long snapper is of less value than him. So I'm just going to hit the long snapper in the midst of the game. Ego is what led Deebo to take to Twitter to say, hey, it's not that I've fallen off. I'm just not getting the ball. Ego is what led to ownership not paying players what they deserved to be paid. Ego is what led to players not playing because they didn't get paid, and so they felt as though they didn't need to go to training camp. Ego is what has led to the demise of the Niners. Ego is what led the Niners to believing they could get right back to the Super Bowl because they were there the year before. Ego is what led to Devondre Campbell feeling as though he deserved to be in the game when Dre Greenlaw came back. When truth be told, you deserve nothing. You earn everything in the National Football League. Ego exists within every individual on the Niners. It exists within all of us. The problem is ego unchecked, it leads to the demise of every individual. It led to the demise of the Niners. I'm blaming ego for the Niners' downfall.
Check your ego.
I agree with most of what he said, but I don't know if it's as simple as that. I don't know about you.
No, I think he was defining ego incorrectly in some of his instances. And now that I'm thinking about it, I can't recall. As he was talking, I was thinking, okay, that's a fair point. That's not. Every professional athlete has an ego to some degree, right? I mean, whether you're a prima donna or not, you have to have an alpha mentality, especially football. And you have to have some sort of ego that you're going to be you're the best on the team at your position or on the field, or else you're not going to survive in such a violent sport. I think where ego is probably most appropriate for San Francisco is in instances where you're drafting a Trey Lance. Even if you didn't trade up, that you drafted someone that raw and thinking that, when the Bills drafted Josh Allen, they were garbage. When the Niners drafted Trey Lance, they were in the NFC Championship game. No, that was coming off the 2020 season. So they're coming off the COVID year, but this is a team that was in the Super Bowl a season prior to that. Ego is using a 3rd round pick on Jake Moody, right? I don't think it was ego
about that.
Yeah, I don't think it was ego that got.
You're taking a pick as essentially a luxury pick on a team that has needs, and for some reason you think that it's justifiable to take a kicker in the 3rd round, as opposed to taking an offensive lineman who you could really use. Yeah, that's definitely ego. I 100% agree.
No, I think that's ego. I think the way that Kyle does not use running backs or a second tight end or spreads out the formation as much or goes to a drop back passing game and is not playing off of what worked so well in 2022 and 2023, which was a commitment to the ground game and play action and yak and not play bombs away Brock. I don't think it was ego that got Christian McCaffrey and Trent Williams and Brandon Ayuk paid. I think it was stupidity that gave Trent Williams, the Niners gave him what he got and the pay bump that McCaffrey got, and Ayuk got close to what I thought he was going to get. So I don't think that's ego at all. And I don't think it was ego that got Nick Sorensen promoted from, I think he was secondary coach. He wasn't quality control. So let's not go nuts there, Acho. I don't think it was ego. I think it was 4th friggin' choice that Kyle couldn't get Ulbrich, or if he reached out to Belichick, or potentially Sorensen was at least the 3rd choice, maybe even 4th if you want to count Brandon Staley, who obviously he brought in to help out with the defense. So while maybe he made good points on half of what he said, the other half I think is easy to pick apart. But let's not assume that Kyle doesn't have an ego or Kyle's not stubborn about some things. And this should not be, like we were talking about earlier, this is not a run it back situation for San Francisco. They have too many holes. They have too many key players as free agents. We didn't even talk about Charvarius Ward, but he's obviously gone. It's going to be a different looking team next year for the better, so they can stay cap healthy. Remember, I said stay because they're $65 million under the cap next year as of today. Staying cap healthy not only for 2025, but for the next 3 years, so they can keep building this thing around Brock.
CJ Gray made a good point. He said short turnaround to get coaches and then players getting injured is what happened. It is true, though, when you are a team that is in the playoffs for a long, long time every single year, that you have the unfortunate side effect of that is that you have to address things usually a lot later than other teams have. Teams have already found coaches, assistants, all that stuff, some front office movement. If a team, say, got rid of a GM or whatever and stuff, a lot of that stuff's already happened by the time the Super Bowl ends, and then you're there to pick up what's ever left.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of it was ego as far as the 49ers not being able to acquiesce to somebody who the players don't sign off on. Because I feel like this whole thing with Nick Sorensen is the fact that he's a known guy within the building. And I feel like if the Niners didn't have any ego, especially within their own organization, whether it be coaching staff or players, that they would acquiesce to a guy who's not part of the 49ers, who's maybe going to come in, shake things up, run things differently. Because let's be honest, as good as things have been, at times it still hasn't been good enough to win the ultimate prize. So to me, you should always be trying to improve, especially like the defense. You could say whatever you want statistically about the defense last season, but Wilkes' Super Bowl coaching in the Super Bowl was atrocious. It was absolutely atrocious. So,
first half was fine. Second half was bad.
Marissa, I've never seen you in here before. Thank you for coming through. She says Staley is awful. Our defense looks a lot like the Raiders Chargers game that sealed Staley's fate. Yeah, it's the old what is it thing when they say like when you have 3 quarterbacks, you have none.
Mhm.
I feel like if you have 2 defensive coordinators, you have none. Like pick a guy and go with him. You know, knowing the 49ers and how they do things, I wouldn't be surprised if Staley is the guy who's the
Yeah.
defensive coordinator next year, and Sorensen's kicked out the. So again, once again, they're placating to the players and saying, "Hey, guess what? We're not going to shake things up too bad. You already knew him. He was in the building last year." And that's to me is one of the. If you want to talk about ego in that instance, I could say I agree that is somewhere where it definitely exists.
Well, you know what's funny? I mean, we never really discussed this, but the idea of firing Sorensen and bringing someone new from the outside necessitates firing Brandon Staley also.
Yeah.
So there's an awkwardness that if you get rid of one, you get rid of both. Which, not to say that Kyle or John are going to shy away from that, because the players know how many collapses have they had. 3 in the NFC West alone, not being able to hold leads in the third or fourth quarter, making games like the Seahawk game, the first Seahawk game, and the Cowboy game much closer than they should be. Right? The fourth quarter scoring differential worse than the NFL. So players know, and you would think that some players would, I don't want to say not have an ego, but looking to point the finger and saying, listen, I'm curious why at the end of the season, players, if they're going to be looking for a scapegoat, like they were with when it came to Steve Wilks, right? Like we weren't getting there with 4. So we were wondering why Nick Sorensen wasn't blitzing more. Like, I wonder if Sorensen gets let go, if there's going to be rumblings about, yeah, we want to be more aggressive. We want to send heat. And we just didn't do that. And that's why we couldn't get off the field, etc. These are things, they're all professionals. They're not run like the Jets or the Raiders where things get out and it's an absolute circus. They're saying all the right things, but yes, Sorensen going and Staley getting promoted is certainly a viable option. But if they go on the outside, then they have to get rid of Sorensen and Staley, which again, I don't know if that's awkward or not, but you got to get rid of 2 to bring in a fresh one.
To me, I think you go completely outside the organization and try something completely different. Not just to try for trying's sake, but you know, there's guys out there that I wouldn't mind. You know, some people have brought up what's his name? Buddy Ryan, not Buddy Ryan, his son, Rex Ryan, and bringing somebody out there who's he's a little insane, but I think he is when it comes to like a personality and having a defense that will definitely have a personality and have a lot of swagger and who talks a lot of shit.
Yeah.
He's definitely that guy. I don't mind a defense that talks shit and backs it up. I am not against that. So, I mean, we've always been a little bit of choir boys, no matter what part of the history of this team. The Niners have always been kind of like the West Coast wussies, where the offense was always considered, what do they used to say about the 49ers offense? We used to play a team like the Giants. They were hard nosed. The Niners were considered finesse. So nothing finesse about bringing a guy like him in here and having him run the defense.
Well, and think about how important just that personality could be if they lose Hufanga. They're going to need to find energy somewhere, and if it's not on the field, it's on the sidelines. I mean, Jeff Ulbrich, as bad as an interim head coach he is with the Jets, at least as a DC, you could see him get fired up. He had some of that Robert Saleh quality in him. They don't flash Nick Sorensen enough on the sideline. And by flash, I don't mean like someone naked under a trench coat doing that, but they don't show him enough to see that if he's getting wild or not. But I think the Niners, the defense feeds off that. If they fed off Dre, they certainly fed off of Saleh and they fed off of Ryans. They weren't feeding off of Wilks. They were almost performing in spite of him in a lot of ways, or the offense was just so otherworldly last year that they were overcompensating anything that the defense was or wasn't doing. Yes, an outside hire, someone with some energy that can run the principles, and Kyle's going to put his stamp on it. You could bring in Buddy Ryan, you could bring the corpse of Buddy Ryan out of the ground, or Rex Ryan or Rob Ryan. Kyle's still going to have his footprint on this defense and run what he wants to run. It's okay. Now you just work within the confines of what I want to do. Otherwise, you're going to see a punch thrown like Buddy Ryan threw at Kevin Gilbride when they were both with the Oilers.
Good point by Marissa. She says, yeah, can we stop running the wide 9? It's obvious it doesn't work anymore. We're all for that. I am for that. I think Al's for that. Yes, and no choir boys, please. Let's get some of that, someone from the East Coast. I mean, we're from the East Coast. We're East Coast guys. No, we're just, I think the Niners could use a little bit of swag. You know, when Dion was here for that 1 year, we had a little bit of swag, and it was kind of cool because we were so thought of as a finesse team. And, you know, the NFC was when, you know, the Dallas Cowboys or the New York Giants were always considered like hard nose or whatever. But at this point, we can only guess. It's all conjecture at this point. We have no idea if the 49ers make any moves. I mean, like we said, the talk from Kyle Shanahan was he gave Jake Moody his seal of approval, his a kiss, you know, like everything's great. So who knows? We might have Jake Moody as our kicker next year. Nothing is decided yet. So we're just going to have to wait like everybody else. I do think 49er fans will be really pissed off if absolutely zero changes are made, which I don't think is going to happen. I think there's going to be some sort of overhaul at some point of this offseason, whether it's special teams, defense, or a mix of both. So,
yeah.
I wanted to address the offensive line. I wanted to play this piece of media from Richard Sherman. He's talking about, you know, Brock getting paid, and if you're going to pay Brock, then you need to address the offensive line, and we can talk about that.
Yep.
That offensive line needs to be the number 1, number 2, and number 3 priority this offseason. If you're going to pay this quarterback all the money you're going to have to pay him, you want to keep him upright so that he can be the playmaker that he has been. This year, he's been under a lot more duress. He's been using his legs more. He's had to leave the pocket more often than not. It hasn't been great. And without Trent, it's looked even worse. You need a right tackle. No ifs, ands, or buts. No discussion. No nothing. A right tackle. You need to figure out a center maybe in the second round. There's plenty of them in the Big Ten somewhere to find them. Maybe one in the SEC, and then maybe find a guard in free agency. It looks like you have one in Pooney. Put a competition out there at left guard, and I know you can't just draft them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but that's what I would do. We're going to hit on one of them.
Whoever thought that Richard Sherman would know more about what the 49ers need to do than the actual San Francisco 49ers do themselves.
Yep. It's hard to disagree with anything he's saying there. I mean, they've started to address it in a weird sort of way this week, right? They wound up signing center Matt Hennessy from off the Falcons practice squad, played under Alex Mack for 1 year, had some injury issues. He's only in his 4th year in the league, and they signed him to a 2-year deal. So it's more, they want to take a look, and it's only 2 games left in this regular season. And he would only come in if something were to happen to Brendel or one of the guards gets banged up. And they brought in a tackle off the street or someone that might've been with the Browns previously. I forget. Kyle is not going to trust a rookie center.
Nope.
But I'm totally with Richard Sherman in terms of they should be drafting 2 offensive linemen in this draft. Yep. 3 would be the absolute top end. You know, I've seen people are putting mock drafts out there of them drafting 4 offensive. They're not drafting 4 offensive linemen with their 9 picks. If they draft 2, consider yourself lucky. If they're drafting 3, pinch yourself because you might be sleeping. But could you see them drafting 2 offensive linemen and bringing maybe 1 or 2 in free agency? Absolutely. Banks is more or less gone. Feliciano is retired. Jalen Moore, the swing tackle, is potentially going to be gone unless he comes back for cheap. If you draft the right tackle, you could always move McKivitz over to left guard and compete there or compete at tackle. You're going to need 9 offensive linemen. So yeah, I think there's going to be 4 new offensive linemen on at least the training camp roster. There might be 8 new linemen on the training camp roster, but I'm thinking 4 new offensive linemen on the 53-man roster in September of next year to figure this out. And yes, they need to protect Brock and put a little bit more emphasis on the O-line, but Brock also needs playmakers too. And Debo looks like he's tailing off, and Ayuk with the ACL, and Kittle another year older, and we don't know what Pearsall is, and McCaffrey coming off. You know, you could see them investing in maybe another tight end or another receiver or something. Listen, they got a lot of holes. We didn't even talk D-line and DN. They got a lot of holes. But everything Richard Sherman was spouting is fact.
Man, the biggest priority overall is you have to draft the left tackle of the future in this draft. It has to happen. You can, based on how this season went, even before the tragedy that struck Trent Williams too, because he lost a child as well as Charvarius Ward. Even before that, he was dealing with the injury with his foot or / ankle, whatever it is. It's not good. He's a big guy, and if it's a foot or ankle, it really doesn't matter. It's bad. But we've been talking about this for years that they needed to address this. Now it's like that. What is it? The worst they can finish is what, a top 12 pick, something around there.
They're at 11 now, so if they lose the next two, they could be. They should be top 10.
I mean, if you're in the top 10, do you trade back out of the top 10 and pick up another pick and then maybe draft the offensive line twice? Do you go defensive end, edge rusher, and then go offensive tackle at the bottom of the first round? Like, there's more than one ways to skin a cat. I know John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have been the type to stay where they are and draft, but they've also been the type to take what they have, trade backwards, accumulate more picks, and then go double dip in the first round. Personally, I would be the guy that would double dip in the first round. I would, if I'm in the top 10, maybe top 8, and someone wants to come get a quarterback, then possibly if they have another first round pick, I would trade back to maybe say like 14, 16 and grab myself, an offensive tackle there. And then if somehow we get back into the back end of the first round, I mean, could you go edge? Could you go a pass rushing defensive tackle? Like you said, there's some needs that need to be filled on this team, but I think offensive tackle and edge to me are the two of the biggest. Offensive line and defensive line, if you want to be specific, are the two biggest needs that the 49ers have.
Yeah.
They need to readdress what got them to the dance all these previous years, because it seems like they've taken their eye off of that and put it in other places. And I feel like it's been to the detriment of their roster. So they need to reinvest in places that got them where they were previously. So.
And listen, for anybody that's singing the doom and gloom and the demise of the Niners, I'm kind of equating the Niners this year to the Eagles last year. Granted, they were 9-1, 10-1 before San Francisco went in there and absolutely broke them, and their season went downhill. But the Eagles last year were a complete mess. And this year, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. They invested in the draft in terms of they have 2 rookie corners that are starting. They bring in Saquon Barkley. They took the D tackle out of Georgia 2 years ago that's paying dividends. And now they're battling for the number 1 seed in the NFC. The Niners have another good draft. They get their defensive coordinator figured out. They evolve a little bit on offense, and with some health luck, again, they could be right there. And I am not a homer. I'm not a glasses half full type of person. There's still a lot of talent that, the tweaks need to be there, but they need to be very mindful and purposeful going into the draft, understanding what they need coming out of free agency. Like if Huff and Greenlaw are gone, all right, how early are you drafting a safety or a linebacker if you did not address that in free agency? How many, you should be taking 2 young linemen, because after next year, Nick Sakiel and Spencer Burford are free agents. So you have 2 less offensive linemen going into 2026. So I think Lynch does a decent job in terms of like the thinking ahead. Renardo Green was for Charvarius Ward or Demo, whoever didn't get signed. Mustafa was probably for Hufanga, just to
this past draft saved the 49ers ass going forward, because they have a lot of hits. Pearsall's still undecided. I don't know what they got in Pearsall, but right. Pooney, Garendo, Mustafa, Renardo Green, all legit NFL players, especially Renardo Green and Mustafa. The Niners lucked out. They still, if Dre Greenlaw comes back next year, all of a sudden you got your linebackers set. Your secondary is 1 maybe free safety away from being set. And that's honestly your concentration. If Dre comes back, needs to be on safety and kind of reinvesting into that defensive line, whether it be another edge. Like I feel they got some edge things in Floyd and Yetur Gross-Matos. I feel like they got some depth going into next year. And then it's maybe we have to go defensive tackle, maybe need reinvest. Maybe if Hargrave doesn't stay, do we reinvest and maybe go a pass rushing defensive tackle in the top 12? Do we dare go back to what we did when we tried to draft Kinlaw with all his red flags? Go with a top 10 pick and go draft the pass rushing defensive tackle in the draft. Like that would, I don't know how the fan base would take a move like that. I personally think it's dangerous. But I mean, there are a couple pieces here and there from being the Philadelphia Eagles of this year. I mean, they still have enough talent on this roster to win 10 games. And I think the NFC West is still a weak conference or a division.
Agreed. Yeah.
The NFC West is still the Niners to beat or to win next year. Look at the Cardinals, the Rams, whatever. The Rams are, to me, the Rams are, they're one Matthew Stafford injury away from being a cellar dweller. He does a lot for that franchise. But I still think the West is winnable. If you can get one win from the Rams every year, I still think the Cardinals are beatable, and I still think the Seattle Seahawks are a joke. And as long as they have Geno Smith as their quarterback, it's still a winnable division.
No, I'm with you. And listen, we're talking about D-line. They should probably be drafting a D end and a D tackle, right? I think Bosa, Floyd, and Matos as your top 3, I think is totally fine. Getting someone in there as a viable number 4. And then you could have Robert Beal and Drake Jackson and Sam O fight it out for whoever the 5th D end is. And they need to bring in a D tackle because Kevin Givens is gone and Hargrave.
I don't want to see him anymore.
Who's that?
Drake Jackson. I
know.
What a horrendous pick. What a horrendous pick. Him and Robert Beal have been 2 of the bigger misses that we've drafted in quite a long time, who we thought was going to come in and be some sort of like super deep pass rushing group. And these guys have done next to 0.
Yeah. Drake Jackson had what? Like, remember last year, opening game at Pittsburgh, 3 sacks. And
I called it with my co-host back then. I said, watch him not get any more sacks for the rest of the year. And it literally happened. I was being facetious. When in my mind, I was thinking, I hope he proves me wrong. And he literally never got any more sacks. So I was like,
and this is why the Niners have some work to do. Like John Lynch and his team, they're going to earn their money this offseason because they have choices, they have decisions to make, and they have to figure out where they want to allocate their money. Certainly a lot of it, or a decent amount of the cap is not decent amount. 25-ish million of their cap space is going to go to Brock with his extension. And then what are you going to do with your own free agents? How many of them are you going to re-sign?
Does Hargrave come back? It looks like there's a chance he could be back. I don't think it's going to happen. He looks like a post June 1st where you save about 20 million. It looks like. No,
who's that?
Javon Hargrave.
Yeah. If he's a post June 1st cut, I think they would save about 3 million.
3 million? Okay. They've already
saved 20 on him.
They've already shrunk his cap space. Right. They went from about 24 million down to about 10. So they're not going to save much more, even if they do cut him. So, and if you think about it, I mean, they could keep him, make him part of the NASCAR package, and have him come in on 3rd down. I mean, that's an expensive 3rd down defensive tackle to put in there. But at this point, they've got to do something to amp that pass rush, man, because it has been abysmal to non-existent this year, even with Bosa in there.
And so, listen, someone like a Hargrave or even a Debo is another, $5 million savings if he's traded or cut post June 1st. It doesn't mean they have to do it in March or April. Like, they could literally wait, see how free agency goes, see how the draft goes. If they find they get another D tackle and someone in free agency and it's June 15th or the start of camp and they trade Debo or cut Hargrave, there's no rush. That's why, fans, we all have got to be a little bit. The only thing I'm impatient for is, like, when are they going to fire Sorensen and who are they going to hire? And can it happen before the Super Bowl? Can we get a little news, something to talk about before free agency hits? But the Niners don't need to be in a rush to let go of players, especially since some players, they're not going to save a big chunk of change if they cut him in March or April or May and designate him post June 1st, because they already did some of the work because they restructured Debo in the offseason, this past offseason, and they restructured Hargrave, 3 or 4 weeks ago. So they got their savings. They could save a little bit more, but again, they could wait till summertime. Like, just keep them on the roster, see how your roster shakes out. See if somebody, see if someone gets hurt in training camp. They could cut him in September.
Yeah.
No rush with these things.
One of the topics that I put down here, and we talked about this in the past. This is before I even met you. I mean, the Niners' strength and conditioning staff. In the past, it's been talked about if should we replace them. We did replace them at one point. I think we brought in like a hockey or a soccer staff. I forgot exactly the staff that came in that replaced the initial staff that was bad. Are you one of those people who thinks that the Niners should reinvest in their strength and conditioning staff, or was this year just just one giant big potluck of bad luck?
I mean, it's been a handful of years or far too many years, at least I guess under Kyle, that they've had issues and they've tried to address it a couple times. Last year was the outlier, right? There was a good amount of health last year. I mean, the Ayuk injury, complete freak thing. I don't care who you have. I mean, unless he was in Iron Man suit, that knee was going to buckle in the Chiefs game, right? Like the thing that, even Trent Williams, an ankle sprain for someone that big, if it's a high ankle sprain, that's going to be difficult for a very large man to come back from. The one that's questionable to me was, Christian McCaffrey's bilateral Achilles tendonitis. If that was uncovered in early training camp or early summer, there was no sign of it in OTAs or anything before McCaffrey even came in to give the team a heads up. Like, listen, my lower legs aren't feel like that. Felt like it was just diagnosed extremely late.
It's funny that he got paid and then all of a sudden
right. I mean, so could he have been holding stuff back for his paycheck? Of course. I'm not going to be that cynical. Yeah.
Hey, Peter Parker says, clean house, Schneider and Sorensen. Have a great summer. Here's your last check, fellas. I think a lot of 49er fans would be okay if they both got sent home for summer vacation and never came back. I just don't know if the 49ers have the testicular fortitude to make both of those moves in one off season. You talk to Kyle, it's more about injuries and people on the field making bad plays. The specialty, the Jake Moody thing to me, I don't know how to take it. You're not going to throw your kicker under the bus with 2 games to go. So what is Kyle supposed to say? Now, if he's the starting kicker week 1 in September next year, then we got problems because he's just not good enough to be an NFL kicker. I don't think he wants to be an NFL kicker. He looks like he'd rather be anywhere else than kicking on an NFL field. I swear at my television every time his face is just so punchable. I can't explain it to you. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean,
well, Kyle gave him the vote of confidence as he should. You're not going to throw your kicker under the bus. I mean, we all saw his reaction when he shanked that 41-yarder to the left. Kyle was pissed about it, as he should be. He did come out and say, like, kickers, it's a hard position because you don't have a backup. Well, I would challenge him there because you could have a backup. You could have a kicker on your practice squad. There's no reason to have, honestly, Tariq Owens on the practice squad. There's no reason. Like, he's never going to see
Trent
the field.
Taylor shouldn't be on your practice squad.
Right. I mean, Tariq Owens would have been like, you could have had a rookie kicker or someone with 2 or less years of kicking experience in the NFL be on your practice squad. And if Moody wasn't feeling right or something wasn't looking right, you deactivate him 1 week, you elevate that other kicker and see how it goes. And if things are going okay for a couple of weeks, put Moody on IR and this new kicker can take over. So I will challenge, or I take issue with Kyle saying you can't have a backup kicker. They're going to bring in another kicker to battle that with Moody. But if Moody is the kicker next year, there's no reason. Out of the 16 spots you have in your practice squad, probably half of those are just spots of players that are never going to get called up or maybe get called up once. So just put another goddamn kicker on your practice squad. I mean, they had 3 quarterbacks on the roster and still have Tanner Mordecai on the practice squad. Unless you have 5 quarterbacks in total, like 4 is kind of the max. So there are ways to mitigate the Moody inconsistencies and not just waiting until he gets hurt. And then you bring in Matthew Wright and Anders Carlson. Again, you could have had somebody on standby this whole time, and they maybe they'll hedge. And if Moody wins whatever competition they throw out there next training camp, maybe they'll have someone on the practice squad. It just seems like a prudent thing to do. one of 16 spots devoted to a kicker. Pratt is not going to sink this team at all.
I just see a lot of teams with a lot of kickers, and they get them from everywhere. A
Yep.
lot of them are not highly drafted. Some of them are undrafted. This whole thing that we needed to waste a 3rd round pick. I'll be honest. When they drafted him, I was happy because he was the best. I was following the draft that year, that particular year, and he was the highest rated kicker in the draft.
Yes.
So when they drafted him, I'm like, oh, that's cool. See a gold, we could allocate that money somewhere else on the roster. That was my thought. I didn't have any idea, and I don't think other 49er fans did, just how mentally weak this guy is as far as when it comes to, one kick can derail him for forever. CJ Gray says he looks like he wants to cry. Where is it? Said Moody looks like he wants to cry. He does. I mean, he just looks like he'd rather be anywhere than on an NFL field. The Niners have so many priorities that they need to address in the offseason. I think Jake Moody's definitely, on the list, but I wouldn't consider him at the top of the list. I feel like a couple other people and position coaches kind of take that top spot, but he's definitely on there. As far as the strength and conditioning staff, I don't think they're going to do anything with that this year. I have zero confidence they make that change, regardless if we want to or not. Like you said, last year was an outlier how healthy we were, but this year has been totally. Is it an outlier or is this the norm? Like what was this year?
We'll go back to what Emmanuel Acho was saying about ego. Ego was Kyle Shanahan throwing Christian McCaffrey out there for 90% of the snaps the first game back. And ego was Dre Greenlaw playing 30 snaps basically in the first half against the Rams before he had knee irritation. I understand the Niners motto, or at least I'm assuming the Niners motto is, if you're good to go, you're going to go. And we're going to make you go until you go into the ground. But there could be more prudence or be a little bit more judicious in terms of bringing players back. And if we want to say, oh, they're being careful with Dre and Trent, the season's over. There's 2 games left. Put them on IR, Jalen Moore. That's fine. But to not be a bit more cautious with the cornerstone of your offense in McCaffrey and the heart of your defense with Greenlaw when they're coming back, especially McCaffrey only got 2 practices in before that Buccaneer game. I mean, it just doesn't compute. But Kyle was still true to Kyle's form. No running back got more carries than Patrick Taylor did against the Dolphins. Brock had the most yards, sadly. But Patrick Taylor, he's right. When we have one running back, we don't use any others. It was Brock, it was Debo, and it was Taylor. And it was all around pathetic.
Hey, Peter Parker says, though 2 moves alone, Joe Kyle still doesn't have a clue. Missed 12 weeks and Dre plays 30+ snaps.
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah, that.
Debo
don't put that in. Don't put it in Kyle's hands.
Handoff.
Don't put it in Kyle's hands. Have someone else on the roster being in charge of snaps, and don't give it to Bobby Turner either, because I love Bobby Turner as far as he, helps develop running backs that come from nowhere, but he's part of that old school mentality of you don't take players off the field, which I think is an archaic mindset that needs to be gotten rid of. You should take players off the field. You should have multiple players getting touches at a spot like running back, because it's the most physical, probably the most physical position you could play on an NFL field is running back. They get nailed every single play. They get nailed high. They get nailed low. They get nailed in the ankles. They get rolled over on. You got, every time the Niners run a ball up the middle, they have 7 guys pushing on one of our running backs to give them another extra 3 yards. I mean, it seems like every other week when that happens, somebody comes rolling out of that pile with an injury.
Yep.
So this whole mindset of, Bobby Turner, part of that old Mike Shanahan mindset of we don't take players out, we run them into the ground. I mean, look what happened with Terrell Davis. He had a short career. Why? Because they ran him into the ground in Denver. Did he become a Hall of Fame running back? Yes. Could he have played way longer and been more effective? Absolutely. So I think take it out of Shanahan's hand, give it to somebody else. Will it happen next year? Probably not. Kyle's going to go right back. That's the one thing about the 49ers, and it's the one thing about Kyle. when, somebody asked him, should he reinvent himself? And he says that you always kind of do every season. Kyle's as stubborn as they come. And unfortunately, for all the good that he's helped do to this franchise and bring to this franchise, that there's the negatives that he consistently brings all the time, and that's one of them.
And listen, if some of his stubbornness is what allowed or helped the Niners get to 2 Super Bowls and 2 other NFC Championship games the past 5 years, fine. But I think there are complaints that fanatics, wild fans have on a lot of teams that are unfounded. I think that the complaints that the Niner fans have or they see with Moody, with Sorensen, that there are quantifiable stats that back up major issues or major shortcomings when it comes to that player at kicker, how he regressed from his rookie year to this year. I think his field goal percentage was mid-80s. Now it's mid to high 70s. Yeah, I mean, I know, hey, Peter Parker's not happy about the Super Bowl stuff, but at least with Sorensen and Jake Moody, there are things that they can point to and say, listen, things aren't working. Defensively, we're going to go in another direction. Kicker, we're going to bring in some competition. Hopefully that brings the best out of you. And if it actually was Jake Moody's ankle that caused that many issues, then why, he wasn't fully healed, then why did you bring him back? Right? If after the first game, he's like, you know what, I don't feel right, then why wasn't Carlson still kicking? Or you bring somebody else in. Yeah, Matt Wright getting hurt against the Seahawks, that was unfortunate. Another tackle injury. But why would you trot out there a liability if it didn't look right or if Moody said anything? And that would be case number 3 of the Niners bringing a player back a little too early and nothing good coming of it.
Yeah, it's I'm not of the fire Kyle Shanahan group.
No.
But I understand all the issues that people have with Kyle, and the overreaction of fire Kyle, get rid of Brock. I don't sign up to that. Now I'm not one of those people who's a blindly loyal fan either, and I don't think Al is either,
No.
where you just cheer for your team regardless, and everything that Kyle does is golden, and Brock can do no wrong. No, I mean, Brock has definitely done some things this season that have made me scratch my head, holding on to the ball way too long. Some of the turnovers with the wet balls and him having issues in the rain, like that's just something he's got to get better at. And then Kyle, and just there's too much the ego thing. When I hear the ego thing, there is a bit of ego in this franchise they've done it in the past. If you listen to the press conferences this year, I know you heard him too, Al, was, we're better than our record indicates. We're not an 8-2 team, or we're an 8-2 team. We're not an 8. It's like, no, you are what you are. You are exactly what that mindset needs to get, somehow get. And that comes from Kyle and John. I think they really put that on the players of be positive. You're not what your record says that you are. You're a better team than that. You just got to, do this, and this, and you'll get better. I mean, there is definitely some ego, and in a way, the way things have kind of worked out, and how they may work out in these last 2 games. I've said it before. I said it on Monday. I want things to bottom out as bad as they could possibly go, because I think they need to have that happen in order for them to make significant changes. I don't want to see any positivity. I don't want to see anything where oh, that ended on a really good note. Well, that's something we could take into the offseason. No, I don't want any of that. Because every time that happens, it's just one less thing that they're going to change going into the offseason. So
I don't think there's any good notes that are going to come out of the Lion game. And if Ben Johnson laps Kyle Shanahan and Nick Sorensen, that's totally fine. The Cardinal game could be a tricky win. If they look good there, that's going to be the lasting impression in Kyle Shanahan's brain, and a lot of fans have as well. But I think, again, there's, we're not getting into all these inane EPA and DVA or any of the other advanced analytics that are saying how good the Niners defense offense is or isn't. A lot with baseball, when it comes to the gut feeling of the manager or the eye test, we've all seen the games. Kyle has seen it more than once, breaking down the tape. He sees how the defense struggles in the second half. He sees how they wilt completely in the fourth quarter. And I think he's hopefully seeing what a lot of us have seen when it comes to the offensive line, when it comes to lack of play action, and when it comes to too much drop back passing game. And I said it on our Monday show with James, watching that Dolphin game and seeing the graphic of how similar their offenses are yet different, and the differences in the passing game where Miami is a short yak passing attack and the Niners are a drop back passing attack is so illogical and backwards to where both these teams were last year, making no sense. And the fact that the Niners were missing or shuffling playmakers in and out from week one, how they were still throwing the ball downfield and not taking what the defense gave them a little bit more. I don't know what that says about Kyle or Brock. Maybe it does say some ego. Maybe it does also say some no fear, right? We're not going to let our personnel dictate what we want to do, but sometimes it should. And even though you had different personnel, you were running a little bit different of an offense last year in 2022, and you were having better results, especially in the red zone. I think there's a whole lot for them to take a real hard look at in the offseason. Get away for a month or two, get away Cabo, whatever you got to do, flush it. But then come back.
Make some babies with your wife, whatever you got to do. The offseason.
Hopefully with your wife and not like Tyreek Hill and with
with everybody's. Yeah, exactly. He says my deal is Brock's arm is weak, so his intangibles need to be beyond approach. I think it's reproach. Is it approach or reproach?
Reproach.
And this year it hasn't been, though the disorganization of the players around him hasn't helped them.
It hasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. There was one more. Okay, how much longer do you have?
No, I'm good.
There was one thing that I didn't want to give this man credit because I'm not a big fan of Grant Cohn, but he did have an interesting stat that actually doesn't support his argument at all, and that is has Kyle Shanahan done better with lesser quarterbacks? And I wanted to bring up this graphic real quick. We have Donovan McNabb, a second-round pick, Michael Vick, first-round pick, Alex Smith, first-round pick, Holmes, number 10 pick, and then you have Brian Hoyer, undrafted, Jimmy Garoppolo's 62nd, Trey Lance 3rd, and Brock Purdy, of course, being the last pick in the NFL draft. It's a pretty interesting stat considering, like, it should be the opposite, right? For someone as successful as, Andy Reid, you would think with those kind of quarterbacks, he would have had a lot. I mean, he didn't win until he had Patrick Mahomes.
What was Cohn arguing there, though? Was he arguing against Kyle Shanahan?
I'm not exactly sure what his argument was. Somebody tweeted that he's actually confused in what he's actually defending or what he's trying to promote. I don't exactly know what he was trying to say there.
If he's saying that, imagine what Shanahan can do with a top tier type of talent. Okay. Fine. I mean, they tried it with Lance. It didn't work, but at least I give them credit for taking the swing. Like they just swung at a really bad pitch, right? Like Trey Lance should have been a ball. Like the strike or the swing should have been on somebody else or potentially a different year altogether, but they were high enough coming off the COVID year that they could trade up with Atlanta or Miami, whoever it was, and make that trade. Yeah. I mean, obviously he doesn't include Matt Ryan, and he had him for a couple of years. And Matt Ryan was the number one overall pick, wasn't he, out of Boston College?
He was,
and Matt Ryan had an MVP season. They went to the Super Bowl, and then Kyle just went full on idiot in the last drive of the game after Julio Jones makes a ridiculous catch down by the sidelines. Instead of running it 3 straight times and kicking a field goal to go up 11, they ran a play action and another pass, holding calls. Like it just got extremely stupid extremely quickly. But we have seen Kyle with a top tier quarterback, and it was Matt Ryan. And if people want to get on Kyle Shanahan for blown Super Bowl leads and other stuff when he was a coordinator, or what he did in Cleveland, or what he did in Houston, or what he did in Washington, then we should put Matt Ryan on that list because that's the highest level his offense has ever produced, last year included. And that was a pretty sick Falcon offense with who they had.
Yeah, Julio Jones. They had the Tevin Coleman, and trying to think of the other running back too. Was
it Freeman? They think they still had Roddy White. Maybe.
Yeah, Roddy White was on there. I think even it was. They were quite good. They had at least 2 or 3 running backs, and they had a really good top three wide receivers too.
Mm-hmm.
I just think the Niners. I mean, Kyle is who we have, and Brock is who we have. So the best the Niners can do is reload. Somebody said that bringing back the same core is not good enough. I agree, but there's definitely going to be some changes to our core going into next year. There's players that are not coming back. Debo could very well come back. I have a strange feeling Debo will be back next year. Just based on the Brandon Ayuk injury and how long that might take into the season. So, yeah, but I think some core players will be gone. I don't think Aaron Banks comes back. Javon Hargrave could be someone that is also let go. You know, I wish we could have seen a little bit of Ben Barch, but he got injured to see what we could have had at left guard. You know, a lot of people were really high on him, but there's going to be some changes going into next year that hopefully it will be for the better. And then you know, you have guys coming back from injury. If Greenlaw can come back and be healthy next year, all of a sudden your linebacking core is, you know, back to where it was before. And now, you know, if you have a couple guys come back next year from injury, like Tatum Bethune, who is the guy that got injured in the preseason? Trying to think of his name. I always forget his name. He was a linebacker
Position?
also.
Oh, Curtis Robinson.
Curtis Robinson. A lot of people were really high on Curtis Robinson. I thought D Winters at points was pretty good, but D Winters definitely is not Drake Greenlaw. That's for sure. He's inconsistent at best, but
it's more it's more the defensive core that has the potential to take more of a hit, right? If Hufanga and Greenlaw and Ward and potentially Hargrave were gone, then you're talking about an impactful player at every level of the defense being gone. Good news is they played half the season without Hufanga, more than half the season, 9/10 of the season without Greenlaw. Hargrave was gone early on, and Ward was in a contract year anyway, and he's not coming back. So I think that with the potential talent loss on defense, to me, it's all the more reason to make a change at defensive coordinator to somehow supplement or offset the talent loss with another scheme that can help put players in the best positions possible. Again, the Vikings have a top, I don't know where they are statistically, but a top defense in the league and a very aggressive defense under Brian Flores. How many defensive players can your average fan name on the Vikings versus players on the Niners? Maybe one, maybe. So it might not be, again, it's that whole, you want the sum to be greater than the individual parts. In Minnesota, that's the case. In San Francisco, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah, I think the 49ers, like they're schematically like something like the point is or was it here? Somebody said that didn't changes. I know it's not something fans wouldn't want to hear, but changes have to be made. Yeah, like this is definitely a kind of a make or break off season. And I think, and like we've said, anything and everything should be on the board. You know, getting rid of your special teams coordinator, your defensive coordinator, saying goodbye to Javarius Ward, saying goodbye to Javon Hargrave, saying goodbye to Aaron Banks. Like I said, the secondaries pretty young and pretty good. Diamador Lenore is probably a top 3 corner in this league, top 4 corner, maybe. Bernardo Green ain't no slouch. And Malik Mustafa is pretty good at his own right. So, I mean, there's that. I mean, Dominique Pooney, yeah, he's had a little bit of a stretch here at the end of the season where he's kind of struggled a little bit, but the Niners have a player in him. And then Ricky Pearsall, we really don't know what Ricky Pearsall is. I want to see him in a training camp, in an off season, not shot, not injured, completely immersed in this playbook.
Yep.
Get a little bigger in the off season, work out a little bit, and then see what we have. You cannot. There's a guy on TikTok named Sack Francisco. He's a super negative TikToker, Niner TikToker. I mean, I thought I was negative. I mean, his whole demeanor is, his face always looks really sad and depressed. He thinks he's a bust. He thinks that Ricky Pearsall is a bust, and I'm just not willing to make that. I'm not willing to make that statement.
Way too early. Way too early.
But everybody, I appreciate you. We both appreciate you coming through and staying with us almost an hour and a half. We will be back on sometime on the game's on what, Monday? So
Yeah.
we got to figure out when our post game reaction would be, and may very well have to be because Tuesdays don't work well for me. So if it's Tuesday, it would have to be kind of late. It would have to be about 10 p.m. So if you're willing to do a late stream on Tuesday night,
it might work. We'll certainly figure it out.
Figure it out. But that will be the next time we see you guys. And then we were going to double dip probably till the end of the season, me and Al. So you'll see me, Al, and James on Mondays usually, and then you'll see me and Al either most of the time on Fridays. But right now, at least last week and now this week, we're going here on Thursday. Kind of doing a recap and then kind of a look ahead to the end of the season. So everybody, we appreciate you coming through, whether you're on X or on YouTube, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody. Stay good.